Hello, Foxy Finds here, and I have noticed that there is a lot of misinformation about the furry fandom. Some people define it by its worst aspects. I'm hoping today to dispel some of these myths and also come up with the best definition that I can. Note, I'm not perfect. I may get some things wrong. That said, I bring you Furry 101. Creative, I know. I'm hoping to be able to explain to some people who are interested, what the furry fandom is about, maybe correct some misinformation, and with luck, this can be a video that you can share if you ever have to explain to a friend or family member what a furry actually is. In this video, like all my content, I will be keeping everything PG. I will not be covering the worst parts of the fandom. Other people cover those all the time. Look elsewhere for that. Every group has some bad apples that make the rest of us look bad. The only thing with the furry fandom is that it can be a little harder to remove them. So, what is a furry? I have come to the conclusion of a self-identification of a shared interest in anthropomorphized animals. Let's break that down backwards. So, starting off with an animal. Some people already struggle with what an animal is in general, but to break it down, I'm referring to something that is a mammal, a reptile, a bird, an insect, but also the furry fandom expands this definition to include some things that are not specifically animals, including robots, clones, aliens, or made-up species that don't really fall under any of those categories. So what is an anthropomorphized animal? Well, we're giving an animal human characteristics. So this can range from just giving them human intelligence to being almost human with just a couple things sprinkled in. A good example is the movie Balto has anthropomorphized animals because the dogs in that have human intelligence. On the other hand, shows like Inuyasha have these demons that have some animal traits mixed in. And those would still be considered anthropomorphized animal when you're talking within the furry fandom. That being said, being a fan of Inuyasha or Balto do not make you a furry inherently, but it can for some people. What do I mean when I say interest? Well, just like any other interest, you could name Star Trek, Dragon Ball Z, cars, planes, war, history. Anything can be an interest. We're just talking about something that piques that interest. That said, comparing the furry fandom to something like Star Trek or Dragon Ball Z is a little bit of a false equivalence. The furry fandom is more like a sci-fi convention or an anime convention setting. It's multiple franchises that are brought together under this umbrella. So this might be the most important part, self-identification. The reason I say this is a person can have an interest in an anthropomorphic animal without being a furry. And likewise, a person can be a furry and only have an interest in one particular type of anthropomorphic animal. The furry fandom is a very wide umbrella term, and the differences between one furry and another is astounding. This can bring camaraderie between people who normally wouldn't get along, but it can also bring a lot of disagreement and divisiveness. Honestly, that's one of the great things about the furry fandom, but it's also one of the worst things. To cover my bases, I checked a few other places to get different definitions and go over why mine is different from theirs. First off, Google says, a furry is someone who is interested in anthropomorphic animals or animals with human characteristics. Furries are part of the furry fandom, which is a community of people who share this interest. This is as redundant as it is useless. This puts the label of furry onto someone just because they like a character. By this definition, anyone who likes Bugs Bunny or Mickey Mouse would be a furry. That just isn't the case. Next is Fur Science, which has a really good logo if you ask me. It states, the term furry describes a diverse community of artists, writers, gamers, and role players. Honestly, this description sounds very, very limiting, while also not even touching on the anthropomorphic animal aspect. I think this is actually one of the worst definitions. However, this website has a lot of really cool information with statistics and research to back it up, so I might look into this website for some future videos. So, Wikipedia doesn't actually have a definition for a furry, but it does have a definition for the furry fandom. A subculture interested in anthropomorphic characters. This is so shallow. It doesn't even have anything to discuss. It has nothing to bring. The only thing to discuss is how little it has to discuss. I don't want to speak too much on what a furry isn't, but there's a few things I do want to cover. Being a furry doesn't mean thinking that you're an animal. A lot of people think this for some reason or like to joke about it. It's just not the case. Next, being a furry doesn't mean that you have or even want a fursuit or persona. Lastly, and this one's probably the most important, most of the negative things that you hear about the furry fandom that people think about, they're not more prevalent in the furry fandom than they are in the general population. That's just a myth. And there's not really anything else to it. Oh, I should probably go over what a fursuit and a persona are. A persona can be a character that someone created, or it could be an avatar to just bridge that gap between themselves and the furry community. Or it can even be an anthro version of themselves. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they think that they are literally their persona. It just means that they are taking inspiration from themselves and putting it into their persona that they make. What does a persona look like? Usually, a bipedal animal with human intelligence. They can be clothed or not clothed, kind of like cartoon characters. And you can kind of make them just whatever you want them to be. Realistic, unrealistic, anything that comes to mind. A persona is not actually required to be a furry. And if you decide, you can have as many personas as you want. You can change what one is, or swap parts of it out, or they can even be bought and sold. Now, a fursuit is a costume of an anthro character. Someone may have a fursuit and a persona that match, but they also may have ones that differ greatly. Some may even get their persona from a fursuit they get. Fursuits are used often for artistic expression, performance, anonymity, to bring a character that they have to life, or even just to socialize. A person in fursuit does not think that they're an animal. I don't know where this idea comes from, but people have that idea. Having a fursuit, or a persona for that matter, is not a requirement for being in the furry fandom. Just the self-identification part is important. That's the double-edged sword though, because anyone can be a furry, but also anyone can be a furry. In the past, there was some negativity associated with the furry fandom, and that did draw some people in that liked those aspects. It's taken a while, but the furry fandom has gotten back to what I feel is the core values. That said, incidents still happen, but for the most part, furries are just interested in anthropomorphic animals. That about covers what a furry is. If I didn't address something, go ahead and leave it in the comments and I will touch on it there. Furry is such a broad umbrella term that some people do fall under subgroups that do fit the stereotypes that people have. So some people may fit the ideas that you have and others will not. That said, that is about it for this video. I'm not sure how long these will take to make, and I don't plan on rushing them. But the next video will definitely be on fursuits and fursuiting. I hope to see you then.